the diversity of seed that our communities hold. And therefore, our communities are our companies that we must strengthen to give us the diversity that we so desire, because we know without seed, we have no future. Next. I use this map to show that for us to survive, we cannot afford to say that if there is no maize, for example, in Kenya, that we are not food secure. Because as a country and as a continent, every part is suitable for a specific crop. And our indigenous people, our grandfathers, our forefathers, our foremothers knew about this. And this diversity that I have used the Kenyan map to demonstrate is what will ensure sustainable systems. We have gone too much monoculture, and we want everybody to produce 3 crops: maize, wheat, and rice. Can we grow these crops in our diverse environments that are found within the African continent? The answer is no. And number 2, for diversity to happen, we can make a decision to do it, because when we have different crops being produced by different cultures, because this is the best thing they know how to do, we can exchange that during different times or seasons. And if that's happening, it's not only helping with the food, but with the nutrition and the biodiversity conservation of the environment, and hence a health environment, which translates to a health population. And now I talk about the soil, because if we have mismanaged our soils because of too much use of chemicals, and chemicals here is not about the plant protection products. It also includes our fertilizers that we are pushing to use. And it's unfortunate that even the communities that are producing indigenous foods have actually borrowed a lot from the practices that were introduced, and they're using that to produce our crops. And then we keep on saying that, you know, indigenous crops are very nutritious. How can you talk about nutrition when there's no safety? Thank you. If these foods are not safe, we cannot say that we are taking nutritious foods. If the safety of our foods is compromised, it means the safety of our soils is compromised, and it leads to the dying of those soils, or they get sick. And with a sick soil or a dead soil, you cannot produce crops in a sustainable way. So we have to start thinking, how are we doing this business? How are we going into the push to produce Africa's crops? We must continue drawing from the indigenous knowledge that is so rich within our communities and integrate that into science so that we can bring these crops back to the table. Now we talk about losses. And I want us to link the losses that are happening within our production systems to the way we are conducting the production. We say that the losses are due to pests and diseases. The losses are due to mishandling or mismanagement. But I think that the greatest losses are happening because we are not doing things right. We use too much fertilizers. And what happens? Some of the crops we produce, we reduce their post-harvest life, and we end up losing them. We produce monocrops, and because of that, they are good food for pests and diseases. Nothing prevents the attack. So once they're attacked, everything is cleared. We lose that. We even lose what we have produced during harvesting. Nobody cares that I have spent so much of my resources, and therefore I should not waste even a grain during harvesting, let alone post at the harvesting. The way we transport our foods, and especially our indigenous foods, I have seen people using motorcycles, people using bicycles to transport tere, that's amaranthus, or the African nightshade. How can we do that? Why are we mishandling our crops? Why do we want to use so much resources to produce the crops and end up not eating them? What about waste? We go to buffet like we had yesterday. Somebody starts filling their plate at the beginning of the buffet, but they realize that as you move along, there is better food, and they keep on piling. And you know what happens? At the end, 5 minutes, at the end, they only consume that which they like, and everything else is thrown away. Why do we throw away money into the dustbin? Why can't we serve enough? Why can't we cook enough to be eaten that time instead of cooking too much and wasting? And if we integrate our African cultures into the way we even eat our food, you realize that it's a taboo to throw away food. Isn't that the case? Or to waste it, because there was a lot of connectedness within society. So if anything remained, we knew how to preserve. What can we do then? Let's work as a team. We are not going to say that science is wrong. There is the science that can integrate our indigenous knowledge, and then the policy or policymakers who sometimes pretend not to know what's happening, so that the three of us work together to ensure that our food systems become sustainable. If we miss that link, then we are done. And this is where agroecology plays a key role. We cannot run away from it. And if we go to all the principles of agroecology, then we realize that this is actually the African way of doing things. I talked about transportation. We must change that. And the storage. Now we have gone modern, but if you go back to the African granary, it had all the properties that science talks about in storage of food, especially the grains, the roots and tubers, you know, all those crops that we are talking about. We can make use of our traditional ways of food preparation. Fermentation, drying. What's wrong with those methods? Can't we use those methods to preserve that which we cannot use immediately? And that's not only science. Science has proven that drying does the trick. fermentation does the trick. But this is what communities have done for ages. So can we then integrate those two platforms? And in reducing waste, which is at the table, let's do the right thing. Get portions that we can finish. And that which remains, preserve it for the future. I think I want to end here by quoting Swaminathan, who says, if agriculture goes wrong, nothing else goes right. Thank you very much.
Just a minute, Mora, because somebody may have a question or a comment. But it's a very exciting presentation, and especially on the food wastage. So if anybody has a comment or a question, we have 2 minutes, or is it 1 minute? Thank you. I think you've touched on something we didn't want you to touch, our eating habits. We like filling our plate and then we throw away the waste. You visit all the, like this morning, if you go to most of the hotel, their dustbins are full of wasted food. It hurts me. So if there's no question, there's no reflection. Oh, there's one here.
Thank you. Prof, you have done a good presentation. I'm Wairimo. I am just concerned about the means of transport. We have seen how a lorry is loaded, and we have seen a motorbike. And maybe it's good that we can explore which other means would we use so that we are able to transport our produce, maybe to the marketplaces or even to take them elsewhere where they're being utilized. Thank you.
So do you want me to respond?
Yes, kindly.
Okay. Yeah, because with our foods and means of transportation, what we need to make sure, you see how we transport tomatoes, although we have again messed them nowadays. We started very well. We had crates where we packed our tomatoes and transported to the markets. Who told you, or who told us that our traditional vegetables do not need to breathe as they move, that we need to tie them so much and step on them and pack them so hard? Because the best thing or the best way of transporting our crops is really through ensuring that we don't have that compaction. Okay. At the moment, in research, and that's why I said we cannot do away with research or science, is that we are trying to see the best method to move the indigenous. I teach indigenous crops at the university, so my research work is about indigenous crops. And so we have not yet developed it, but so far crates that are used for tomatoes can be used for our traditional foods. And it's interesting that as you move those foods like that, it's not only the quantities we lose, but also the safety and quality. But we get the policemen and everybody else just being interested on the load, and no one is interested on how safe that food is when it gets to the market. So maybe we need to start rethinking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that informative presentation. Mine are two. One, I would like to know about fermentation. Up to what level do we ferment this food so that it doesn't get into the alcoholic level? Number two, currently we have the Kenya Dairy Board and has ensured that milk cans are supposed to be stainless steel, no aluminum. Again, now we have a ban on polythene papers. If this is a research work which has been done, why don't you maybe try to inform the government that we no longer need these plastic like sacks where we transport or where we have our food stuff transported in, where they don't actually breathe. They get very warm and hot, such that like vitamin C, before they end up with the consumer, is already compromised. Thank you.
I can take another question before I respond. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof, for that good presentation. Mine is on food waste. There is that thinking or that mentality, especially from the older generation and in the African tradition, that once food is cooked, it has to be cooked a lot and consumed until it remains. Because if it finishes, then you are not satisfied. People are sleeping hungry, and we end up wasting food in that process. Now, and what needs to happen in such situations? Because ugali lazima upikwe uliwe mpaka ubakie ndio watu wao wameshiba. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I will want to start with your question. On fermentation, I'll give Dr. Mokaya to respond. How much do we need to ferment until we don't lose nutrients or something you said like that? How far can we go in fermentation? So that we don't get to an alcoholic drink or food, but it's not bad to get the alcohol. Anyway, he'll respond. But yes, but on the issue of packaging, and if research has been done to inform policy, it's a pity that, I'm talking about the Kenyan situation, that researchers are doing their thing, farmers and practitioners are doing their thing, and policymakers are doing their business. And what we have recently brought out, and which we are working on now, is to bring these three sectors together, because we need evidence, the policy-informed policies that are evidence-based. And we need researchers to address the farmers or the actors' needs. And farmers should get informed on better ways of doing their business. So if those three arms are not linked, if we don't work as a team, then we might not succeed too much. Okay? On the issue of tradition and cooking too much until you don't clear your plate, I think that's from my understanding, our ancestors or the earlier generation were very wise. They never did what we are doing today. It was just to remain a small piece, and that piece was never really wasted. They had use for it, whatever remained in that plate. It's not what we are doing today. You serve a full plate, you eat a quarter, and you throw away 3/4. I'll let Dr. Mokaya talk about fermentation. I'm not an expert as I sit down.
May I try and attempt to answer that? Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. Let me just give this might be the only chance for me to speak because I need to compliment the fact that this conference is happening. There is a reason from the cosmic space. the ancestral spirit and the awakening of the African mind, from framing things from a Eurocentric perspective, and gradually back to an Afrocentric perspective. So for some of us, this is a homecoming, a reawakening, and a re-identification and embracing of who we are as African peoples. And as my sister puts it, you use the word, we are Al. We are the tree of life, and our true name is Al Kabilan. So for this generation of ours, Professor Onyango, Professor Mora, you know, in the Kisi culture, there was Mora Ngiti. She was a warrior. So I see you embracing that warrior spirit. So in future, I'll suggest that instead of putting an M, write your full name. Your name is Mora Onyango. Onyango. Yeah, it has a meaning. Go ahead and clap. So for me, really good people, this is not just an expo. This is the beginning, I believe, of a journey that we must all travel together. Some of our brothers and sisters are not here. Some are listening online. But I think it is a good thing happening. And some of you may not realize this, but this cosmic energy has somehow possessed even those of African heritage whom you did not be mutated, but who out of diversity became of lighter complexion. And they think that they are different from the African roots. The African gene is the original gene of humanity. Whether you look at it from a creation perspective or an evolutionary perspective, this is what science is telling us. So having given that overview, the goodness is happening. We've agreed, Professor, that seed is the beginning of accepting who we are. We're not talking about plant seed, good people. We are also talking about animal seed. We are also talking about human seed. He who controls your seed controls your food. You controls your food, controls your life. And if you have no life you control, you have no future. To fermentation, I could go on, but let me just stop there because I'm adding too much speech. The true meaning of fermentation was, ask yourself first, what are you fermenting and why are you fermenting it? Most of this fermentation took place, it's a process of bacterial interaction with certain food to release, listen to this, to release certain nutrients. That was the original purpose of fermentation. This is why we fermented milk, and we made milk. That's why we fermented different grains, African grains, the phonios, the millet, the finger millet, the sorghum, and the intent and the vegetables, different vegetables. Yeah. The purpose was not just preservation, which Prof has ably covered, but it was also to release certain nutrients that our human body needed to interact with to produce what we call probiotics. I'll finish at this point. When you do the process the way it was originally meant to be, you release nutrients, you release products that enrich your food value. It's a process of bacterial action interaction with the food to release nutrients that add value. But when you do this process wrongly and you produce certain other substances, because there's a timing, there's a time frame. For example, alcohol. The traditional alcohol,
Moratina.
And other African varieties were designed to be produced within a certain, there was a packaging, there was a science behind it, a time frame, the extent, and the quantities, and who consumed those products. So it's an ecosystem within which this was done with an intention of answering the question, why, what was done, how it was consumed, and how much of that was consumed. The new brews, the whiskeys and the brandies and so on have been designed with a different purpose. And the scientists who are here can correct me. The bacterial process was interrupted, we produce a different product, which in many cases, when taken wrongly, is actually toxic. So as a seasoned medical practitioner, who's now a strong agroecological foods health advocate, I would say that if fermentation was done right, it was not just a method of food preservation, but a method of releasing nutrients, necessary minerals to produce what we call pre and probiotics. We now know, listen to this, is my last statement, the human gut system is made of trillions of bacteria. More than 80% of those cells are bacterial cells from non-human sources. And unless we maintain a certain amount of probiotics, we then release conditions that are not favorable, that compromise our immunity, that result in a system that is not metabolically balanced, resulting in many of the emerging mental conditions and metabolic conditions, including, listen to this, diabetes, hypertension, cancers, and guess what else? And all these chest issues are substance. So you use the probiotics.
Thank you. Somebody take that
microphone,
microphone, please. Somebody take that microphone, because if you don't snatch that microphone, we'll continue listening.
Yes, I have to stop here because this is why I told Professor that I should open my mouth, because when I do, I don't know how to close it. But let me close it.
Number one. Take the microphone.
Who do I pass the microphone to? Thank you very much. I hope that was useful.
Thank you, Doc.
Too much. I should have begun my own session, actually.
It's exciting to listen to you, Doc. And when you talk about something that is within you, the passion is felt, and we need that knowledge. That is the knowledge that was hidden from us. And I thank our ancestors that they are awakening us to that knowledge, that when we sit to do research, something is actually boiling from within us, and you get an opening that you also don't understand, information that is really, making somebody feel like continuing. You find yourself sitting on your laptop for one night, and by morning, you have more than 100 pages of research findings. So thank you so much. Njoro, good morning. Watu wamenyamaza sana, walikuwa wanagojea mkulima. What is happening? Mkakuja kusoma. Yeah, so thank you so much. And I want to point something that Professor has mentioned about food handling. And yesterday I mentioned about how we removed food from home and it became a commodity. So even when we are transporting, we are not transporting it as food. We transport it as a commodity. I don't think I need the government to tell me about food safety. I should be able to take care of my health. So with those few remarks, thank you so much. I would like to invite Professor Kerengai. He's an expert in information documentation, and he's doing something on indigenous foods and food systems documentation. Karibu daktari. Oh, Prof.
Asante sana. Asante sana Joki Wametugo. I'm here from the great county of Murang'a, and my desire this morning is to discuss with you how we shall be documenting the indigenous technologies that we have in foods and food systems. And we'll be looking at them from the perspective of where do we want our researchers to be going for information associated with foods and related technologies, particularly when you are thinking foods, herbs, and spices. And one of the biggest challenges that we have had is that a majority of our researchers, everybody takes, goes and collects some data, a bit of it, and another researcher will be interested in extending that research, but getting the data of the initial researcher or initial research, it is impossible to get. The reason we do not document what we do. So I am a proponent for open data. So I lead an organization called the Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition. And the intention that I want to discuss today, you flip to the next. Oh, I have this technology here. Okay, yes, it goes there. It is, we need to understand the content that I will be presenting, and because the time is short, I will actually not spend very much time explaining. But we are looking at documenting indigenous knowledge. We are going to discuss documenting the foods and the critical areas that it entails. And then we are going to be discussing the food system. And an effort has been made by my colleague and sister, Dr. Mora. Now she is actually Dr. Mora, Professor Mora. We are not going to be discussing much on spices, but we will actually see how can you document anything to do with spices and herbs. And we want then to go into the diverse ways of documenting indigenous knowledge, and how the Africa Indigenous Food and Food Systems Expo will actually be taking forward some of the issues that we have around us. I want to then mention a bit that the biggest challenge that we have with indigenous technology knowledge is that it is passed from father to son, from one person to another. And there has to be, in many cases, there has always been a relationship between those. In the language that Yoki knows, it is if you have a custom of being a seer in your family, you will have seers in that family all over. It's like what you know about Coke. The Coke formula, not many people know what is actually contained there. That tradition is maintained, even in a social setup where knowledge is supposed to be deepened when it is shared. And we'll actually be talking about the disruptions that come associated with the socioeconomic and ecological issues, and the poor documentation that comes from knowledge. So we are looking at what is it that we can do to enhance the passage and adoption of transformation. It only comes when you engage with an organization or framework. And you will remember